forge your inner armor. Welcome to the Inner Armor Podcast with Dr. Timothy Royer, where we explore ways to train our brains and bodies to become dynamically resilient so that we can all, from professional athletes to ordinary people, perform at our potential. Well, welcome to the Inner Armor Podcast. I'm here with Dr. Royer. And Doc, welcome.
Hey, it's good to have you back from Israel, Greg. How about that? That was awesome.
It was pretty fantastic. Yeah, what a great experience, and always a great experience going there. So much to see, so enriching and life enriching, and everything else. I mean, I could talk for a long time about it. I did on another podcast last week. But you've been off the grid as well, Doc, a little bit lately.
Yeah, I did one of my mental health couple weeks sabbatical, I guess, which for me is pounding nails. So we've mentioned in some of the podcasts before that in my other life, I have a builder's license, which, I don't use to support my family, but I use to support my psychological and emotional well-being. Being a psychologist, I learned very early on that when you would try to move or adapt the walls in people's lives, you would find that they'd come right back up again the next session. And so doing something where I can physically put a wall up and it stays, or take a wall down and it stays. And so I've been building our next house, which is in right outside of Charlotte by Lake Norman in a little town called Denver, North Carolina.
Wow, that's fantastic. And, I know that about you, that all the years, you like to get your hands dirty, literally, and, get dirt under your fingernails. And you've talked a lot about that over the years. And I know you've built so much. And we're going to be talking in the next couple episodes here, too, a lot about engaging fully with our senses and the world around us. And so it's a wonderful sort of counterbalance to all the intellectual and the work you do and all the sort of lab-based work that you do to get out and touch and feel and see stuff, right? So,
yeah, absolutely. And as we talk about the book today, I think there'll probably be a couple pieces of that come up. Yeah.
Well, absolutely. And that brings up the topic of the day, which is that you have a new book out. It just came out a couple of weeks ago, called Forge Your Inner Armor: Strengthen Your Brain-Body Connections to Perform at Your Potential. And it's available in print, Kindle ebook, and audiobook. You can find it on Amazon. So tell us about the book, Doc.
Well, first of all, it's a collaborative effort. Yes, I have a book out, but I have to give major kudos to you, Greg. You are the writing talent behind all of this. And while I have different ideas and have spent many years doing this clinically, man, you've put pen to paper and just done such a phenomenal job of just taking what you and I have discussed for almost a decade now and really consolidating it into something that somebody can digest pretty quickly and easily. And that was one of our main goals. Was we don't need to talk about volumes and volumes of neuroscience. Everybody's got Google, that kind of stuff. But let's take the real important issues, summarize it, get it into the hands of people so that they can really do some things to better their lives and those around them.
Yeah. Well, it's always, it's such a great thing to work with you, Doc, because you've got such clear concepts. And, when we first met, I was struck by how cogent and pointed your ideas were. And, in a field that can be kind of diffuse and complex, you had some very, very strong principles, some real clear goals, ways that you sort of tied things together. And it's just a real joy to sort of, take all that in and be able to sort of summarize that for people.
Yeah, I think some of that over the years has been my own sense of trying to bring some organization or boundaries around all that exists theoretically in psychology and those kind of things. And many of the things that, I spend my time on, which is a lot of data and input, real time input of the brain and body. I didn't really learn all that in graduate school. That isn't what we were taught, which is kind of sad. The only thing that really I think started me on that journey was all the neuropsych testing that I really specialized in, and learning those kind of data points about people, how to assess memory functioning, cognitive functioning. And, I really kind of gravitated toward those data driven things. And it was out of that I started to look more and more at the science and the technology. That really is what this book is about. This isn't, all kinds of theoretical, tell yourself this and that, and you'll feel this way. This is hard data interfaced with what you're feeling and experiencing. And that brings some sense to my world. And so I find that when I communicate that to people, that they really gravitate towards that they here's something I can finally understand. So it's not just for them, but it's for me too, to kind of put some sense to all of it.
Right. Well, let's just give people a little bit of context here. So it's a short book. You and I have been, again, working together for more than a decade, and we've talked a lot about publishing. I used to work in publishing, and it's interesting because publishing has these guidelines. Nonfiction books of this category should be about this many words. In publishing, you don't count pages, you count words. And, fiction books should be of this category, this genre, so long and whatnot. And it was real common in the early 2000s, late 90s, let's say mid 90s, for a sort of nonfiction book in this category or this genre, kind of a neuroscience performance type book, to be 90,000 words or something like that, 80,000 words. So it'd be like a 300-page book. And one of the things that's interesting is, and I know you've got them on your shelf. I've got several of them on my shelf here that you've recommended to me over the years that I've read, and they're all 300 and something pages. But what's happened over the years is that people's capacity to read longer material seems to have shrunk. And I'm sure we could talk about all the ways that neurologically people just don't have maybe the attention span to read a longer piece because we're saturated by media and a lot of the things. So when we first started talking about this, we said, well, instead of writing a 300-page book that people get a third of the way into and then give up, why don't we do something that's very short, very punchy, very cogent, gets right to the point. And so this is 100 pages, 20,000 words. The audio book is 2.5 hours. You can listen to it on an airplane, a car ride, whatnot. And we felt that it would be better to do more sort of short pieces than few long pieces. And we hope that will get the information in people's, not only in their hands, of course, but into their heads, and have them digesting it and helping them make use of it in their lives, so to speak. So the book explains sort of the foundations of your work over the last 20, 30 years. And it's really about the nexus between performance in the real world, what we do, and the medical science that affects that performance. Because our performance in the real world is affected by a lot of things in our body. And what we can do with our body using medical science and training and things that you have developed will therefore improve our performance, right? I mean, that's the nexus of what the book is about.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't you talk a little bit about, summarize some of that for the listeners?
Yeah, I think performance is something that we can measure many times in sports or the workplace. We can't always measure it in kind of the day-to-day, down and dirty kind of things that we do, like getting the laundry done, mowing the lawn, getting the kids from here to there. I guess if the kids don't make it to school that day, you can kind of measure the level of performance. But they make it there with 2 seconds left, or they make it with a few minutes and some calm and steady structure to their life. Those are different levels of performance. And, it can be a very vague thing. And, I've been doing this for 30 years, and coming out of graduate school, I realized, wow, this is a very hard thing to actually measure if you're just doing subjective things. Here's a good example. I did a lot of different lectures on sleep, and hopefully you guys out there have listened to the sleep lectures, but to audiences. And I can remember this one time I was asking some people at a lecture. It was a couple day long. So I started the lecture by saying, hey, let's rate your sleep. So I had two individuals say 1 to 10, what would you say your sleep is? And both individuals said 8 or 9 out of 10. Great, great sleep. I'm like, that's interesting. And I could tell one person was, just barely hanging on. They've been nodding off during the lecture. Now that could be me. I don't know. But I was like, really, 8 to 9 out of 10. So we do sleep studies, mobile sleep studies, where we literally look at architecture in the brain, and we can quantitatively see where you fall developmentally to your age with your quality of sleep across multiple variables. Not like a Fitbit. This is like real live sleep architecture, polysomnograph. So the next day I got their results back, and one of the guys who was 8 or 9 said he was 8 or 9 out of 10 was truly that. His sleep architecture was spot on. Beautiful, great amount of REM, deep sleep, very few awakenings, got to sleep in the right amount of time. The next guy was one of the worst sleep studies I've ever seen. I mean, it was just awful. There's a red marker that's used for awakenings, and you should only see a couple little slices of that. This whole graph was completely red. And from his vantage point, because he didn't have a reference, that felt normal, right? And he's like, I'm 8 or 9 out of 10. And the other guy's 8 or 9 out of 10, but they're not 8 or 9 out of 10 because they're not being measured objectively. And that is kind of in a nutshell. Let's expand that out. All kinds of variables in our life. There's ways to measure these things when it comes to performance in relation to our autonomic nervous system, our brain, our body, our heart, our hormones. And this book is really encouraging people to start to look at some of these objective things out there, looking at our nervous system and measuring it in relation to performance, and not just subjectively, I'm doing pretty good. Well, you're doing pretty good compared to what? Yesterday? The last 2 months? What is your reference point? And giving some absolute, not relative, absolute values to people that they can truly measure how well they're functioning.
Doc, I know your story, know your background, and that your kind of career vision, life vision has been to help people improve themselves. And so all of your motives in your work and your medical work and your practice and the companies you've built, whatnot, are all about trying to help people figure out how to be the best versions of themselves and to maximize themselves, like you say, not just in a subjective way, but in an objective, measurable way. And that kind of leads to sort of the story of this book. And I know there's a little bit of a story behind how it came to be written, and that kind of ties into your background. You want to share that a little bit?
Sure. So I used to be co-owners of a company called NeuroCore, and it's a great experience. My business partners and I were together for 13 years. And about 10 years ago, we decided as a company to write a book. And that's actually when you and I met, Greg. And it was great. Somebody during a board meeting, because we did a lot of work and I continue to do through Royer Neuroscience and Inner Armor, a ton of work with ADHD. I mean, I would say that's one of that and anxiety disorders are my two biggest clinical things that I would say that I have a lot of expertise in. But we were literally seeing thousands of individuals with ADHD. And because I'd done so much work in that space, we wanted to write a book about kind of the epidemic of the increase of the diagnosis of ADHD, the misdiagnosis of it, and the mismanagement of it through multiple medicines that many times aren't even addressing the right thing. So somebody at a board meeting said, because I was talking about the brainwave activity that these medicines, if impact one way positively, but negatively take their creativity out. And this person came up with this great title. They said, we're burning out Rembrandt. And I'm like, wow, isn't that true? Aren't we doing that? In order to keep kids in their seats, because somebody wants them to act a certain way, we're taking away all their creative brainwaves with these stimulants, and we're getting rid of Rembrandt. So Greg, you and I, oh man, how long was that we worked on?
That was like, I think we met like almost 13 years ago because we worked on the book for over 2 years.
Yeah. I mean,
and so it was like 2010, 2011, we met. And I remember how interesting it was because in my first meeting with you, you turned the world upside down for me in terms of understanding this issue because you laid out this issue about ADHD. And I remember at the time, and I think we want to come back to this point in a minute, but ADHD was the big new thing, right? So
yeah,
it was in the news every day. It was, the talking points every day. Like that was the hot, disease. And so, I'd known people with it. I thought I'd known people with it, heard about it, surrounded like everybody else at the time, like ADHD, everybody's got ADHD, kids have ADHD, adults have ADHD, blah, 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 blah. And I met you and we started talking about doing this book. And in the first meeting, like in the first hour, you laid out sort of your understanding of attention hyperactivity disorder, right? Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. And you turned my whole understanding of that upside down.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, whoa, wait a minute. It was like, somebody just like flipped the script. And from that point on, I was so intrigued. And then you and I spent about 2 years, delving into this and, you sharing stuff with me. We met a lot of people, talked to a lot of people, and then we started, writing drafts or whatnot. And it was an incredible experience for me because it was kind of the gateway for me into your ideas and a whole different understanding of how our bodies and our brains work. And so we ended up writing that manuscript together.
Yeah, it was hours and hours, and I was like, man, how much more can I talk to Greg? I talked to you more that 2 years than my entire family together. It was unbelievable how much we talked. And I mean, it got to a point that you were using the same words or our language was just kind of synchronized. You know how when you get on a topic with somebody that all of a sudden you're starting to think and look at the world a certain way, and you introduced some different concepts to me. And so we were cruising along, got this book done, and it was very interesting because I'd never written or been part of writing a book. And so I have a client of mine who's also a good friend who's been on the New York Times bestseller list multiple times in the top 10. And, I'm like, I sort of know books, but I don't know books. And I remember sending him Rembrandt, and he sent it back and he said, Doc, this is one of the best books that I've read in this area. You really have something here. And it was super exciting. Like, oh my gosh, we really do. Well, the other side of the story was the company started to take a different turn and they didn't want to publish the book. They wanted to do something different, which was fine. We had leadership that wanted to do that. And it was kind of sitting there and I'm like, man, I really want to get this thing published. And then go ahead, Greg.
Well, I was just going to say, it was another thing going on at the same time, because I remember that we got the manuscript done and there was an agent that was shopping it to the big 5 publishers in New York. And I remember there was a conversation with Random House and Simon & Schuster, and, like they had all this interest in it. But then what happened, and having worked in publishing myself in the past, is when you have a topic that's a hot topic, then, right, like everybody starts producing books on that topic.
Yeah.
And publishers start commissioning books on it, right? Because it's just a marketplace thing, right? This is a hot in market segment right now. Let's like push product into it. And what we got back was, well, now there's a flood of books about attention deficit hyperactivity disorder.
Yeah.
And, the publishers are putting out, 2 new books about ADHD every week. Bam, 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 bam. And by the time we got the manuscript to them, they were like, well, yeah, but, we've already published 10 this month, year on the topic. And so it was a little interesting because your approach to the subject was very different than all of those other books were flooding the market. And I felt really frustrated because I was like, well, yeah, I know you guys are spamming out all of these books on the topic, but I don't want to say they were all wrong. They were all taking sort of a conventional approach. And you had a very unique perspective on this and unique data and unique information. But the marketplace was like, well, yeah, we're going a different direction.
Yeah, I'll say it for you. Most of them were all wrong.
Yeah, they were all wrong.
I can say that clinically, data-wise, all kinds of stuff. So the book kind of got shelved, and
well, and then was one last thing on that, right? Because, and I know we may come back to this at either this episode or some future episodes I think that we have planned, is because diseases go through these like popularity cycles. I hate to say that, right? But you and I have talked about that, you know, in the 80s, there were certain things that were like the hot new disease, and the 90s and the early 2000s. And then all of a sudden, like, you don't hear about ADHD anymore.
Right.
I mean, I'm not saying you don't hear about it at all or it's not out there, but it was like you couldn't turn on a TV, you couldn't open a magazine, you couldn't do whatever without ADHD. This was like 12 years ago. And now, when was the last time you saw a story about it? So then the disease became sort of not popular or hot anymore. And now nobody's putting books out about it because it's in the rear view mirror, and we've moved on to some hot new diseases.
Yes, exactly. And they cycle through, and this is a great, that'd be great content for a podcast, because I mean, I've seen it over the 30 years, you know, multiple personality disorder, juvenile bipolar disorder, which nobody ever heard of that before, ADHD. I mean, the list just goes on, and how it comes on, and it's hot, you know, Asperger's, everybody's got this, you know, and it's like that, this book, if you really read this book, you're going to find out that those are all downstream. Those are downstream behaviors. And this is all about upstream, what makes these behaviors happen, which I want to get into in a minute, but I want to finish the story on Rembrandt, because it does get interesting, right? So we had written this book, kind of got shelved a little bit. And then 4 years ago, January 2019, I got completely blindsided and lost my company, where I wasn't expecting something to happen. And I'm going to say, of the different events that happened in my life and my family's life, it was top 2 or 3 most disruptive experiences of my life. Losing my company that I'd worked on for many, many years. And that happens in business. Things like that happen. But I didn't know if I was ever going to bounce back from that. And it's been amazing to see what's happened the last 4 years. It's been incredible, the growth of Royer Neuroscience and Inner Armor. And I look in the rearview mirror now, I'm like, wow, that was the best thing that ever happened to me. But it sure wasn't pleasant with all the lawyers and all that stuff going on. But one of the things I asked for, like as I was unexpectedly going out the door with my box of things that I owned from the company, was, hey, can I have Rembrandt? Because it's been sitting in a shelf in the back of a cabinet someplace. And can I just take that with me? Because I think I could repurpose this. And the lawyers did not let that happen. So Rembrandt was gone. And I remember one of the things I really regretted over those, you know, next couple of years was, man, I sure wish I had that book, because there's so many good things and principles in it. But I couldn't do anything with it. So all that long story to say, this last fall, I don't know what happened. It was just kind of one of those things. Usually after I rest for a few days, all of a sudden I come up with an idea. But I woke up one morning, and you and I hadn't talked in a few years. And I woke up in the morning and said, who needs Rembrandt? I got Greg. I said, you know, why am I so obsessed about getting this manuscript when the guy who knows everything about this, knows everything about the neuroscience behind, he's a phone call away. And I remember going through my contact list, where's Greg? Where's Greg? And I called Greg, and we were down here in Florida, and you're still up in Michigan. And I said, Greg, how you doing? And he's like, Royer, what are you doing? And I said, I said, hey, we got to have lunch. And I can remember, was it, I guess sometime in September, maybe?
It was October.
Was that?
But it was interesting because you called me the week of my daughter's wedding. She got married on October 22, and you called me like right at the beginning of wedding week, which I know you're going through this next week. And so it was like I was in the same space then that you are right now. And it was like, what? That's this call from, Tim Royer. And I'm like, what? And so, so I said, well, wait till after the wedding. So we met for lunch out at Lake Michigan the week after the wedding. And,
and I remember we walked up. I just pulled in and I was like, what's going to happen here? Right. And pulled in the parking lot. Nobody was there. They hadn't opened the restaurant yet. I hadn't seen you for a few years. And it was like we literally just picked up the conversation. I mean, it was like we were midstream conversation and just picked it right up.
Yeah.
And we sat at that table by that window.
Yeah.
And we started brainstorming and said, who needs Rembrandt? We got all the ideas. I got Greg. And, I still had this vision, this passion for getting the underlying information that is so important to people out there. And you had the same vision. And it was just a matter of like, well, let's turn a few dials here, turn a few dials there. We had started Inner Armor, which is really a culmination of many, many years in clinical experience, which I think is way better than other things that we were doing in the past. And it was like, this needs to be about forging your inner armor.
Yeah.
And man, you took off. And it was amazing to see you kind of crank out this book with me just over a few months. So it was really cool how something that was kind of negative, like, wow, all this work, and I think we can get hung up in that, right? Sometimes is like this maybe thing doesn't happen in our lives the way that we think it should, or this one maybe advancement in our job or this one thing that we're kind of set our sights on. And we don't realize that like really what's been part of that is the developing of the relationships along the way, the skills along the way, the mindset that, well, let's just pivot that. And it may not be that specific prize, but you still end up with something that's way more sometimes than what you ever thought the prize was going to be. And that's what I think we've got here with Forge Your Inner Armors is way bigger than Rembrandt, which was very specific on the ADHD topic. This is really applicable to every single person on this planet. This book is.
Yeah, because, that was the thing, like I said, 13 years ago or whatever it was, when you and I first met in that first conversation, and you sort of turned my understanding of the ADHD thing upside down, because what you started talking about is the autonomic nervous system and the brain and all these kinds of things, how it works. And then how, as you said earlier in the conversation, how what happens is these neurological conditions manifest themselves downstream in certain behaviors. And then the behaviors get labeled. And then we address the behaviors. And how a lot of the psychological world or psychology and psychiatry, I remember at the time, there's the DSM is the giant manual of psychological or psychiatric disorders. And I remember learning from you a dozen years ago that in reality, a lot of that's just descriptive.
Yes.
So if I have if my left hand shakes, then I say, well, what's wrong? Why does my left hand shake all the time? They go, well, on page 600, you have shaky left hand syndrome. Well, that doesn't tell me anything, right? That's just a description of the behavior, right? Yeah, but that's shaky left hand. I want to know why my left hand shakes. And what revolutionized my thinking for you is that, like you say, you went upstream on this stuff. And we say, well, if we start understanding what's going on inside the brain and the nervous system and how those interact with the other systems of the body, then all of these behavioral things are simply sort of the external symptomatic expressions of that. And what we need to be doing is looking upstream. So to your point, when we sat down at that restaurant the week after my daughter's wedding back in October, and you said, hey, look, what we had done with the Burning Out Rembrandt manuscript was we had really touched on those things, but we really focused on them in the context of this one specific disease or disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And what we're doing now with Inner Armor is we're just, freed from that, and we're going to go upstream and address the autonomic nervous system and how it interacts with the other systems of the body. And that allows us to address all kinds of stuff in our lives. And I remember sitting at that restaurant getting so excited about that, going, yes, I'm really excited. I'm really in on this, because I can see, and in the intervening years, I'd seen in my own life and the lives of the people around me, how much of what affects the way that we live, the way that we perform, whether that's in our jobs or our just day-to-day lives or whatever, how much of that is driven by what's going on inside our bodies and what's going on inside in a scientific medical way. And that this has the potential to really help people, genuinely help people improve their lives by addressing those underlying causes.
Absolutely. For the people out there that really, if you look at it and you feel like, man, this medicine really hasn't addressed the underlying thing that's going on, or this distraction I'm doing isn't really addressing the underlying thing. This book is about how to get at the root of this. So I've always said for the last 15, 20 years when I'm lecturing is, let's stop looking at behaviors and let's look at the brain, right? Yeah. So there's 8 million children and adolescents diagnosed with ADHD. There's 10 million adults here in the United States, at least, diagnosed with ADHD. There's 48 million people in the United States diagnosed with anxiety disorders. And I'm going to tell you that it's a small fraction, less than 1% probably, that somebody's actually looked at their brain. We're talking about brain-based problems. Okay. If I go into the doctor and I've got something's wrong with my heart, right? And he says, oh, you have heart racing problem. Great. I'm like, are you going to look at my heart? Are you going to get an echo? Are you going to check my pulse? Are you going to, my blood pressure? Of course he's going to do all those things, right? And we are still diagnosing these same disorders that are neurological brain-based disorders off of behaviors like we did 50, 60, 70 years ago. Nobody's using available technology to actually image the brain. Look at I can see in a brain, and we talk about this in the book, which is really cool. We can look at the brain frequencies, the electrical current that drives these different behaviors, and get upstream and not put a Band-Aid on these by just like changing the chemical activity randomly, like throwing darts at a dartboard. Well, how's Johnny doing? Is he doing better this month? Oh, he's not. Let's up his medicine. What is that? That's not science. That's a joke, right? We need to look at hey, I'm looking at Johnny's brain, and yeah, I see this is going on that you're reporting to me, but his brain is getting better. So let's give it more time. Or maybe we can reduce this toxic chemical to his brain and make it much more that he's learning to focus versus chemically altering his focus. The same with anxiety, depression, even physical things like blood pressure. Last person with high blood pressure that got put on a medicine, how many of you had your doctor said, hey, let's look at what's going on in your brain that could be driving your high blood pressure?
Yeah, and we talk about that in the book. We talk about how these things are all connected to the systems of your body, and that there are these internal protocols that are sort of hardwired into your autonomic nervous system, the HPA axis, and what's going on in the lower portions of your brain down through these different nervous systems of their body, how those are connected to different organs and hormonal systems, so that things that trigger produce all of this cascade of symptoms. And, one of the things that I know you've talked a lot about is, that game that you play in a carnival, whack-a-mole. Yeah. And so, right. So the mole pops up his head, you take the big, handle thing and you whack it. Right. And then it pops over here and you keep doing this. Well, what ends up happening is someone says, well, little Johnny or Susie or something has ADHD. So let's give them a pill. And then the whatever that that symptom seems to go down, but then there's this other thing that starts going
They
on.
can't sleep.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
can't sleep, right? And so then you give them another pill. And then there's this other thing. They get depressed or they get anxious, so you give them another pill. And before you know it, you're just playing whack-a-mole because you've never gone upstream or down, or to pick the other analogy, you've never gone down to the foundation to figure out what it is that is driving all of these behaviors and symptoms in the body. And I think that's the thing 13 years ago that impressed me so much about your approach. It impressed me when we got together again back in October to work on this book. And it's why I'm so excited about being a part of this company and this organization with you, because I really believe that we are helping people to improve not just to lower their golf score or win a Super Bowl, which you do.
Yes.
Right. But really help people become better human beings and to live more full, complete, thriving lives. And so anyway, what we tried to do in this first book was lay out the sort of medical scientific principles behind this. Because all this sounds a little like, woo, maybe new agey or wellnessy, like, oh, the secret things in your body, but it's not. It's actual documentable medical science about how your brain and your nervous system operates, how it interacts with other systems of your body. So in this very short book, kind of a plug for the book, right, in 100 pages, 2.5 hours on the audiobook if you want to read it that way, 10-minute chapters, we really walk through the systems of the body and how those systems work, the kinds of reflex responses that take place in your body, and how those can be understood and measured and how they can be addressed. So I think it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a window into things that nobody's ever talked to you about. Like, go into your doctor and say, hey, what's the exit strategy for my child's ADHD meds? What's the exit strategy for my Xanax, for my panic attacks? What's the exit strategy for my sleep problem? Will you keep taking this the rest of your life? Really? But what lies behind all of this is the brain and the body are the most amazing things that have ever been created in the entire universe. And yes, we can chemically alter things, but the power that exists in the brain and the body to actually heal itself, the best medicine for the brain is itself. And you're going to learn about the technologies that are right at your fingertips that you could look at your brain. I mean, we can literally send these things to your house and you can hook them up to your brain and we can see what's going on, what's driving these things upstream. It's literally amazing. And you don't have to stop playing a dart game with your brain or your kid's brain and say, well, I think this is working. And who knows what the long-term side effects of disrupting the sleep or doing all these other things is going to be.
Absolutely. So real quick, the book, we address the hidden involuntary systems in your body, the autonomic nervous system and others. We talk about how we have to align those systems in order to improve precision and power and focus in your performance. We talk about the book about stress and cumulative stress and stress loading. And we'll do a whole episode or two about that. We talk about measuring and monitoring the brain using, modern technologies and how neurofeedback training can help us find a new normal. So anyway, go to Amazon. It's Forge Your Inner Armor. Strengthen Your Brain-Body Connections to Perform at Your Potential by Dr. Timothy Royer. It's available in print, Kindle ebook, and audio formats. And Doc, if somebody is excited about everything that you're talking about, what's the next steps that they can take with Inner Armor or Royer Neuroscience?
Yeah, well, we're really excited to announce that we'll be releasing a individualized program that you can actually do in your home through Inner Armor that exists with 10-minute sessions that you can fit into your schedule, unlimited sessions per month, coaching. To learn more about that, go to forgeinnerarmor.com. But this is available to you if you want to really take a major deep dive into all your brain and body functionings, Royer Neuroscience. takes that up to an even higher level, where we send some really advanced equipment to your home that's accessible to you. The same things we use for pro athletes. So RoyerNeuroscience.com. We'd love to have you join our community and start looking upstream at why these downstream things are happening, whether that's physiologically, emotionally, psychologically, and really take your performance, whatever arena that's in, to another level.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Doc. And I hope that a lot of people will take you up on the offer to read the book, listen to the book, and contact the company to figure out how they can begin applying it to their lives. This has been the Inner Armor Podcast. You can find it wherever you get your podcasts. Would you please follow or subscribe, and make sure to leave us a review or comment. You can learn more about Inner Armor, Dr. Royer, and how to perform at your potential by going to forgeinnerarmor.com.